Poštovani gledalci, lijep pozdrav iz multimedijalnog deska BHT1. Vijeće sigurnosti Ujedinjenih nacija razmatra situaciju u Mijanmaru, odakle u Bangladeš izbjeglo više od 370.000 pripadnika muslimanske manjine Rohinja. Sastanak se održava po hitnom postupku na zahtjev Velike Britanije i Švedske. Dok je Bijela kuća duboko zabrinuta krizom Rohinja u Mijanmaru, Evropska unija prati situaciju i najavljuje konkretne mjere još u toku ove sedmice. I u nastavku ovoj temi razgovaramo s našim specijalnim gostom kojeg poznajete preko malih ekrana, glumac s 20-godišnjom karijerom u pozorišnoj, filmskoj i televizijskoj industriji, a ovoga puta u svojstvu člana kolegija i ambasadora Međunarodne organizacije za izbjeglice refugiesinternational.org. And we are in LA speaking to Mr. Thomas Sadoski tonight. Mr. Sadoski, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
In the past 3 weeks, the world was faced with the horror coming from Myanmar. You are probably one of the fewer people that has been very active on raising awareness of the current humanitarian crisis ongoing in Myanmar and the systematic violations of the basic human rights that have been somehow overlooked by the Western powers. Could you explain to us the Refugee International Organization platform in this particular situation, and what are your personal impressions these past few weeks?
Well, Refugees International is an organization who works outside of government funding and outside of United Nations funding so that we can be on the ground and operate from both sides of conflict in order to help the most vulnerable people. And in this situation in Myanmar, the most vulnerable are the Rohingya civilians who are fleeing what seems to add up to ethnic cleansing and genocide at the hands of the Myanmar military. It is our belief of the organization that the United Nations should be allowed on the ground, that international humanitarian aid should have unfettered access to the country so that we can get to the people who need help, get food, clothing, and the United Nations should be allowed on the ground to start a fact-finding mission so that we can see exactly what's been going on, and if things need to be taken any further than that, that those stories are told and that those facts are found. My personal impression, outside of my role as a member of the board of directors of Refugees International, is that this appears to me, and I'm no expert, but it appears to me to be pretty undeniable that we're dealing with ethnic cleansing in Myanmar at the hands of the military, and a lot has to be done. We need the United Nations on the ground. We need international humanitarian organizations on the ground, but we also need governments to respond. The international community has to step up and respond. We have to marginalize and isolate the military in Myanmar. Sanctions have to be imposed back on the country if this is going to continue. And I think that we've allowed this to go on for far too long. We here in the United States eased sanctions and normalized relations with the country of Myanmar. I think probably too soon. We did it without fully recognizing the extent of what was happening over there and how much power the military still had.
It took the United Nations around 3 weeks to call it ethnic cleansing. Could this be the turning point? And in your opinion, should action be taken, as you said?
I hope this is the turning point. The turning point should have happened a long, long time ago. This is not a new development in Myanmar. This has been going on for decades. This most recent outbreak of violence has, unfortunately, it appears, led to what experts, I think, would categorize in the final stages of genocide. You know, there are the 8 stages of genocide. I think that we are in the final stages from you know what I can see on the outside from the reports that are coming in from the media and aid organizations, which tells me that something should have been done a long, long time ago. But we are where we are, so we have to deal with the situation as it exists now, and something has to be done immediately. It's a shame that it took 3 weeks for the United Nations to make a statement, and I don't know that it is made truly a strong enough statement in this regard. I think that there's still some work to do. I am reminded in this situation of Rwanda. where, the international community sort of hedged its bets for a long time, and tried to, parse it and pull it apart and say, well, this, well, that, and there's not time. There's just not time. Like you said, 300,000 people have fled.
370,000 already.
370,000.
Exactly. The newest report said. And the last time UN called it ethnic cleansing was in mid-90s, right here in this country, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Right. And they said never again. And now we're facing it all over again. Hasn't history been a teacher in the past 2 decades?
One would hope so. I remember very clearly what happened to your country, what happened over there in the 90s. I remember very clearly when, Srebrenica happened and the reports of it started to come out, and when the world really learned about what was going on. And we did say never again. It was actually, Srebrenica was the thing that, as a young man, cued me off to being more in touch with the world at large, and eventually led me to where I am today as a board member of Refugees International. So I am very much reminded of the horror and of that history, and it is unfortunate that we are not that far removed from a number of terrible events, and
we haven't. We're facing it all over again.
All over again.
You have openly criticized Myanmar civil leader Aung San Suu Kyi for failing to protect the Rohingya Muslim minority that is being systematically oppressed by civil-led government and Buddhist extremists. According to you, what is it that she should have done and still maybe should do? Who is really responsible here?
Well, who's really responsible here is the military. And I think that bears repeating, and that should be very, very clear. Myanmar has only recently come out of a military regime that ran their country. Aung San Suu Kyi is the de facto leader of the new theoretically democratic government that is in place in Myanmar, but it remains to be seen how much power she actually has. However, as a Nobel laureate, one would hope that she would show not just the courage to stand up for the oppressed minority, but to not stoke the flames any further. And she has been directly responsible for continuing to use terminology apologizing and also using terminology that continues to enforce the disenfranchisement and the marginalization of the Rohingya people. And at the very least, one would hope that she would do no harm. But she hasn't done that. She's actually stoked the flames even more. And I will remain critical of her and continue to be critical of her as long as she continues this wrong-headed approach.
And we receive daily reports of Muslim Rohingyas, including women and children, being prosecuted and killed in a surge of ethnic violence. Wasn't this enough to take concrete action immediately? And what are we really doing wrong here?
One would hope that would be enough to take concrete action, but it hasn't been, and that's a shame. So what are we really doing wrong here? We're not listening. We're not taking things seriously enough. We're getting caught up in politics. When you start looking at who trains the military in Myanmar, what trade deals they have with gas and oil, and power, with building of dams and all of these sort of things, and the open trade between the United States and Myanmar, we start getting caught up in money and finances and economics, international politics, and as always happens, people get left behind. And we need to reprioritize people. There's no excuse, none.
And when we say we, who are we?
We, the international community, we as a people, we as a human species, we need to be holding we, the citizens of our countries, need to be holding our governments responsible. Those of us who are fortunate enough to live in countries where we can hold our governments responsible.
You wouldn't really imagine things like this would happen in 21st century.
No, it's like you had said, we have just dealt with this. the mid-90s was not that long ago. Rwanda was not that long ago. Syria is still
and the families are still looking for the remains of their loved ones. So we are really not done even talking about that, and it's going to take us a long time to keep on talking about what's going on in Myanmar.
Yes, this is the scars of Myanmar are only, the wounds are still bleeding. They haven't even had an opportunity to become scars. And you know, we as a community, as a human species, we as an international community have let the Rohingya down, and we can't continue to do it any longer. You know, there are only about a million Rohingya in Myanmar, and 370,000 of them have fled. You know, you're starting to get into really serious numbers of displacement, and it's scary, and we need to do better.
UN agencies and Doctors Without Borders have been pushed out of the country, Myanmar. It's not excluded that there have been crimes against humanity committed once all the evidence gets authenticated. And social media has done its work pretty clear, hasn't it? It's a powerful tool.
Social media is a powerful tool. It can also be an incredibly dangerous tool. And in a situation like this, where there's so much fake news, and I use that term knowing exactly what it means, and particularly living in the country that I live in now with the leader that we have now, there is a legitimate effort being made right now on behalf of the Myanmar military and Buddhist extremists within Myanmar to put fake news into circulation so as to discredit those people who are working to tell the truth about what's happening to the Rohingya Muslims. So it is incredibly vital right now that as we, you know, use this powerful tool of social media, that we make sure that we're getting it from sources that we can trust and sources that are authenticating the information that we get. There have recently been pictures of you know, that have been put out by accounts associated with Buddhist extremists and the Myanmar military of supposedly showing Rohingya villagers burning down their own villages, which have been discredited thanks largely to social media sleuths. But you know, we have to be very careful, and we have to use trusted organizations. It's why it's so important that, you know, international aid organizations like Refugees International, like Fortify Rights, like Doctors Without Borders, have a voice and have a presence on the ground.
And trusted journalists on the ground right there.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, journalism now this is where we really see the importance of journalists and journalism. And, you know, those journalists on the ground, there are a number of them who have done extraordinary work. I mean, you've been really great about highlighting them. I've been working really hard at highlighting them. You know, Matthew Smith from Fortify Rights, Poppy McPherson. There have been a number of people from the BBC who have been on the ground over there who have been doing great work, and you've been doing great work yourself. And, you know, I appreciate that.
Thank you, thank you. About 120,000 Rohingyas live in camps for internally displaced persons having fled previous violence, while further 400,000 live in camps in neighboring Bangladesh. The conditions in camps are almost inhumane. United Nations have reported the limited shelter capacity is already exhausted and seeking for help themselves. I mean, when United Nations seek help themselves, the situation is very serious. So what is the Refugees International Organization role in this, and who can help and how?
Well, you know, Refugees International's organizational principle is to advise governments and the United Nations where best to use their resources. You know, we don't have the capacity to set up camps or to get on the ground. That's the job of the United Nations. And frankly, there are some other wonderful international aid organizations who've been doing that very well as well. I know that the government of Turkey, or I don't know the government of Turkey, but I know that some Turkish folks have gone over to help. I know that there were a number of religious Sikhs from India who had gone over to help set up some camps because they had heard that the United Nations camps were being overwhelmed. So it's those organizations that are able to do that, whose sole focus is getting those camps, those humanitarian sites set up, who need our support. And Refugees International is going to continue its mission of, you know, informing the United Nations and any government that will listen where their resources are best spent and best used in this situation. And I think that, you know, right now, the UN Refugee Agency could use all the help it could get over there. The international aid organizations that are on the ground that are helping these people, the World Food Program, I think, is over there delivering food and clothing. And they need all the support that they can get. And, these are organizations and people who are on the ground, their voices need to be heard because they're seeing it firsthand.
We've seen some reports over the past few days of mistreatment of refugees in Bangladesh as they are fighting for food, for water, clothing. And today's report was that Bangladesh's government asked for Myanmar to take back all the refugees because they cannot handle the exodus of Rohingya refugees anymore. So what are we supposed to do? Who should jump in here? Let's take in consideration that UN Security Council is scheduled to hold a meeting on Rohingya situation, and European Union announced concrete measures this week. So we do get the situation, we're starting to get the situation a little bit more serious now.
Hopefully. It remains, there will be, I know that Fortify Rights and Matthew Smith over there just briefed the Security Council recently, and there is going to be a meeting this Wednesday, which is great. We'll see what comes of it.
You have hopes?
I'm happy that they're taking it up. That makes me happy. But there are a couple of countries who seem to be a little bit resistant to putting too much pressure on Myanmar. And in regards to what should be done with Bangladesh and Myanmar and sending the refugees back, it's tricky. It's very, very hard.
Because this could be a path to certain death for these people.
Undeniably. You're dealing with a military that has laid out landmines as people have been fleeing, a military that has been shooting people in the back as they've been attempting to flee over the border.
Beheading children.
Reports
should there be more public outrage?
I think that there should absolutely be more public outrage. I can't believe there hasn't been. But as people learn more, they are becoming more and more outraged. And our job is to get the story out right now. The country of Bangladesh is overwhelmed. And it wasn't necessarily in the best spot to be taking in refugees anyway. They're dealing with their own problems. This is making things a lot more difficult for them. And they've done a great job thus far, and they need to be supported to continue to be able to do a great job. But these people are Burmese citizens. They should be allowed to go home, and they should be allowed unfettered access to their country of origin. They shouldn't have to go home to live in concentration camps or set aside internally displaced persons camps. These are citizens of a country who deserve.
Those are people that were born there. Children that were born there, and
generations of people who have been born
generations of people. And just to wrap it up, how does this information come across the United States?
We're starting to pay a little bit more attention. We have a lot on our plate over here, but people are starting to listen, and I'm not going to stop talking until I can get as many people listening as possible. I continue to reach out to my senators. I continue to reach out to our ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. I stand ready to work with any politician of any party in order to put an end to this. And Refugees International is right there leading the charge. So. We're trying to get people aware, and they're starting to become more aware here. Hopefully it's not too little too late.
You're doing a great job, I have to say that. Mr. Sadoski, I'd like to thank you so much for your time, for being with us tonight, and thank you for speaking out on these issues.
No, my pleasure, and it means a lot coming from your country, which has dealt with it so so specifically, and I'm sure that the heart is still very much in it for you folks, and I thank you guys for paying attention and for reaching out.
Thank you once more. Poštovani gledalci, bio je to gospodin Tomas Sadoski. Hvala za pažnju i ostanite svakako uz program BHT1.